All right, we are back, and today is another episode of Divorce Well in Florida, presented by Fairway Law Group. My name is Matthew Waring, and I'm here with my partner, Brian Dunmire. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the emotional toll of divorce and just the psychology of divorce, what we've seen in practice, what we've been able to educate ourselves on, just to provide some perspective to people who are thinking about divorce or going through the divorce process in Florida. Things to keep in mind because the psychological component and the mental health component and the stress management component of divorce is the best tool in your toolkit. Controlling your emotions, controlling your stress, and thinking logically throughout the divorce process is a more potent weapon than any law or lawyer or legal strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. If you start to look at any studies or YouTube videos or whatever you might want to look at regarding major decision making, you're going to come across the concept that it should be based off of logic, not emotion. It might be a little bit easier to explain if you're taking a lot of money and trading stocks or something. You want to make sure that you've done the research, you think you're buying a good company or a good ETF or whatever it might be. This Visa stock is going to go up, so I'm just going to buy it just because I think it's going to go up. And then it's the same concept again, using the stock analogy. If you were to look into stocks or anything like that, if you own, say, 1,000 or 10,000 or $100,000 worth of Visa and it drops, it's not necessarily and this is not stock advice by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of times you'll be very tempted to just sell because it lost money or something along those lines. But if you start researching that type of decision, the more you can base off of logic, data, hard facts, it's going to be a lot better. And it's no different in divorce. You're going to want to try and remain as logical as possible.
Yeah, there's rules in divorces in Florida, and we've got to follow those rules. If you approach a divorce case logically and try to remain as calm as possible and try to manage your stress as much as possible throughout the case, and you let those procedural rules do the job that they're there to do, you will get divorced. As long as you follow those things and you listen to the advice of your lawyer, it is a high likelihood that you're going to get a fair result. People get unfair results when they become emotional and they start doing things like rushing the process, trying to do it too fast, reaching hasty agreements, not wanting to do the due diligence during the financial discovery process. They're more concerned about certain emotional things, let's say keeping the dog, than they are about getting full disclosure of the husband's 401k account. Those sort of emotional decisions. Not to say that a dog's not important, but trying to remain logical throughout the process is the best bet that you have on getting a fair result.
Yeah. And on that note, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later on in the podcast, but one of the big issues that I consistently see in divorce cases is that the law is not perfect. And when Matt says a fair result is under the confines of what the law allows or how the law divides property or whatever it might be. And there are certain things that are very emotional in a divorce: money and kids. Those are kind of the two things: property and kids, and property encapsulates money. One of the big issues is the law is not always fair. And if you're not a lawyer, which certainly most of our clients are not, you might hear things for the first time and immediately be taken aback that the court system works that way or that the Florida laws work that way. Some of the things might be much more emotional as it relates to kids or school designation or something like that. Other things might be things that are much more kind of just binary. It is what it is. To give a specific example, one thing that comes as a shock to a lot of clients is that their spouse is going to be entitled to half of the retirement that was accumulated during the marriage, half of a 401k or whatever it might be. So you've been married for 10 years and you have $100,000 in your retirement that was accumulated during that 10-year period. On your spouse is entitled to half of that. And the first time clients hear that, it can be very upsetting or cause this kind of knee-jerk reaction. That's my retirement. That money never went into a joint checking account. And there are a lot of things in divorce cases that we can fight for, change, whatever it might be. But something like that is pretty cut and dry. There might always be some exceptions here or there, but most likely your spouse is going to be entitled to half of the retirement that was accumulated during your divorce. And the background on that is because essentially those are marital wages. Those are wages that were accumulated during the divorce. And instead of putting it into a joint checking account, you opted responsibly to put it into a 401k, but they're still marital wages. We can't control that as lawyers, right? You're validated when you hear that for the first time. It's a valid feeling to be upset or think that that's unfair or not understand it. And there's no issue with that whatsoever. It might come as a shock to you, but we can't change that as lawyers. And the whole reason why we're doing this specific podcast is to talk through, hey, when you first hear that, it might cause you to get upset or very emotional, but you want to try and create a mentality that allows you to either take a few days to digest it, take a few days to understand it is what it is. We can't change it as lawyers. But what that doesn't mean is to do this knee jerk reaction, whereas, oh, if my spouse is going to get half of my retirement, then I'm ready to just burn everything down and nobody's going to get anything. So that's one of the reasons why we are doing this podcast today.
You know, I've heard it said before that the cause of anxiety, the cause of stress, the cause of worry is when somebody is living too far into the future and they're living in a perpetual cycle of unknowns because they're trying to predict what the future is going to be to try to remain safe, to try to prevent danger, to try to prevent harm. And the fact that they don't know what the future holds causes them a great amount of anxiety today. That's what makes divorce so stressful. Divorce is stressful because you don't know, you've never been through the process before. You don't know what life is going to look like during the divorce process. You don't know what life is going to look like after the divorce process. There's a lot of fear about what the future holds for you, where you're going to live, what your lifestyle is going to be, how much money you're going to be paying in alimony or child support, how often you're going to be able to see your kids. These things all are in the future and they all cause anxiety and stress today. The best thing to do, and it's a lot easier said than done, is to take the divorce process day by day. Have a good lawyer on board, listen to your lawyer's advice, let the lawyer be your shepherd, so to speak, to get through a tough time. Because if you are concerned with every single detail about your future result, you're going to be living in a constant state of fear and anxiety, and that's going to overwhelm your ability to think logically and execute at every step along the divorce process. Like I said, a lot easier said than done, but I feel like that's where the major source of the anxiety comes from, is the unknowns. Having a good, long, deep conversation with your lawyer at the beginning of the case, when you kind of go through all the assets and liabilities and you talk about time sharing and the children and the properties, and the lawyer can do a pretty good job of forecasting what the result may be. We as lawyers, we can't predict outcomes, we can't guarantee outcomes, but we can get pretty close to showing you what life may look like after a divorce. So having that conversation with a lawyer at the beginning of the case may help to reduce a lot of the anxieties about what might be unknown at the end of the divorce case.
One other very large general concept to understand that I think is just going to pay dividends in the future is to really understand the concept that your life is going to change after a divorce. And it sounds silly with me even saying that. Of course, it's going to change. But things that you've done in the past might need to be changed. And there might be things that need to be changed that you didn't think about. Who's going to pick up the kids from soccer practice? Maybe you've got to figure out how to leave work a little bit early on Wednesdays or whatever it might be. There's going to be things that change. And the more that you can just acknowledge that, even if you can't accept it, but just acknowledge that things are going to change. And there might be some curveballs that are thrown in or some things that you otherwise didn't anticipate changing that are going to change. If you can just acknowledge that, then you're going to be able to cope with the changing landscape throughout the divorce a lot easier than thinking that you're just breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend when you were 20 years old. You're probably living together. Maybe you have kids, probably have joint checking accounts where both of your incomes are being deposited into. Maybe you do the grocery shopping or your spouse does the grocery shopping and now you're going to have to do the grocery shopping. Whatever it is, whether it's a big change or a small change, things. And I think that there's a lot of, I don't want to say unnecessary, but added anxieties and emotions that come into play when you don't have that realization that maybe you're going to have to start doing the grocery shopping or you're going to have to pick up the kids from school and get them to soccer practice 3 days a week or whatever it might be. If you can at least at the very first level just acknowledge that there are going to be changes that we as an attorney can help you predict, and also changes that we don't know at the start of the case that might evolve later on in the case. I mean, not to beat a dead horse with a stick, but if you can just acknowledge that, it's going to help you get through your process a lot easier and take less of an emotional toll than if you think you're just going to go through a divorce and really nothing's going to change except your spouse is going to move out of the house. Because if you have that mentality and then you find out that you can't afford the mortgage when you really get down to it and the house needs to sell, so then all of a sudden you've got to move out of the house and your spouse has to move out of the house, and we're just for 6 months thinking it wasn't going to happen. That's going to be a tough pill to swallow. So something to think about.
Yeah. What I've often seen is, and it's kind of my personal opinion, is that the hardest and most stressful part of a divorce case, the part that's the hardest to get over for most people, is making the decision to file the case in the first place. It's making the decision to get the divorce. Once you've made the decision to get the divorce and you've gone through all the different stages of grief or gone through the anxiety or had to maybe get therapy, get friends, get family on board, having friends coach you along, getting a lawyer hired, getting to the point where you're ready to file for the divorce case is often the most stressful, most difficult part. And why is that? It's because most people are good people and most people don't want to hurt other people. And people are afraid to file for divorce because they are worried about the harm that they're going to cause to their spouse or their kids. They feel like they're bad people. If you're the one that is looking to file for divorce, you feel like a bad person because you're going to cause this harm and this disruption to your family. And I think that getting past that fear is often the largest hurdle that most people have when pursuing a divorce case. And those are all legitimate fears. Good people do feel that way. And I know that society a lot of times can kind of judge people that file for divorce and say, well, you're breaking your commitments in marriage, you're abandoning your family, you're causing all this disruption and harm. And a lot of these people get casted as the villain for filing for divorce. I think that that is not necessarily the case, because you get casted as a villain for filing for divorce because you're seen as breaking commitments to your spouse. When you get married, you're going to be there for better or worse, good health, bad health, all that kind of stuff. And those are commitments that you make when you get married. And I feel like people think that they're bad people when they're filing for a divorce because they're breaking those commitments. However, a lot of times what I see is the people that are pursuing a divorce, their spouse has already broken commitments to them first. And that doesn't always mean adultery. It can mean a lot of different things. But a lot of times a person filing for divorce is filing because the other person has already defaulted on their obligations in the marriage. Maybe your wife doesn't want to have sex anymore. Maybe you don't have any physical intimacy. That's a core commitment in a marriage. And if that core commitment is broken, then it forces the other person to have to file for divorce. The one that's filing for the divorce isn't necessarily breaking the commitment. The commitment's already been broken. And there's a bunch of different scenarios. It could be the wife who's filing for divorce because the husband became an alcoholic or quit his job. He's a couch potato. He's not providing for the household. You name it. a lot of different reasons why people break their core commitments in a marriage, forces the other person to have to file for divorce. And the person filing for divorce is just carrying through with the procedural steps to conclude the marriage, which is already at an end. So I feel like that's the hardest part. Certainly hiring a lawyer helps because the lawyer takes the filing out of your hands. You hire a lawyer, that lawyer is going to file your case. Just by signing the retainer agreement and making the retainer payment, it's out of your hands. That case is going to get filed. So it kind of helps deal with the anxiety a little bit because instead of ripping off your own Band-Aid, somebody else is going to sneak up behind you and rip it off when you're not looking. It helps get that Band-Aid off, so to speak. Another huge component that I see in divorce cases that causes a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety for people is when you get divorced, you're giving up control of the other spouse. You can't control your other spouse anymore. In daily life, when you're living together in the house, there's a lot of control issues going on in marriages. And the party who exerts the most control in a marriage often has the most difficult time in the divorce process because they can no longer exert that control over their spouse anymore. And losing that control creates a lot of stress, a lot of tension, and a lot of anxiety for the partner that's used to exerting that level of control. I don't necessarily need to go through examples, but the spouse losing that control factor really causes them to kind of spin into a tizzy. So that's one aspect. If you are that person that exerts control, there's just no other way to sugarcoat it. You're going to have to learn to let go of control. If you're doing a 50-50 parenting plan and your children are over at your soon to be ex-husband's house for a week because you're doing week on, week off, you're going to have to learn when he's got the kids to just give up control over what those kids are doing at his house. Now, there's exceptions. If there's abuse and neglect, then those are things where you're going to need to get involved. But absent those things, if it's just merely you having a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress because you can't control the children's daily lives or their routines while they're at the other parent's house, that's part and parcel of divorce. You're going to have to learn how to get over that control factor.
Yeah, and kind of tagging on to what Matt's saying, I like to read a lot or listen to audiobooks. I'm a big believer in the Stoic ideology, just kind of taking the punches as they come and taking things day by day. And I would encourage anybody who's considering the divorce process or anything to just look into the Stoic ideology, even if you don't necessarily agree with every single part of it by any means. It's at least good to know about. I read something in a book one time that I found fascinating. It kind of changed my perspective on things. One of the reasons why people sometimes are hesitant to file for divorce or apprehensive is because what are people going to think of them? They're filing for divorce and they have two kids or whatever it might be. And one thing to think about is whether or not when you've heard somebody getting a divorce, a friend or a friend of a friend or a work colleague, hey, John's getting a divorce or Mary's getting a divorce or whatever it might be, what was the thought process that went through your head? Did you think any negative about them or did you just say, oh, that sucks, but life goes on? And I'm not trying to normalize divorce or encourage anybody to get a divorce, so to speak. That's only a decision that you can make, and we can help you guide through the legal process in that. But the truth of the matter is that there's going to almost certainly be a lot less judgment from third parties than you originally might anticipate when you're going through a divorce. Of course, your friends are going to support you, and your spouse's friends and family are going to support them in those scenarios. Just keep that in mind if you're thinking about like the embarrassment factor of getting divorced. Just think of times that you've heard of friends of friends, colleagues, whomever, yeah, we're getting divorced. I mean, you just shrug your shoulders and say it happens, and you go on and you order your lunch and you eat your lunch and you don't think about it again. It's going to be the exact same for you. So that's definitely one thing to think about. All of this kind of goes into categorization of stress management as well, and how important stress management is during the divorce. One thing that we cannot tell you as an attorney is should you tell your spouse, your wife, your husband, if you're getting a divorce, should you give them a heads up? Whatever it might be. We can't tell you what to do on that. We can talk to you about it. We could talk about how we'll inform them that a divorce was filed, but that's definitely going to be something you'll need to make a decision on whether or not you want to give your spouse a heads up that they're getting the papers. I'll tell you anecdotally, most people know that they're getting divorced, or hey, wife, I'm filing for divorce. My attorney's going to email you or call you or whatever it might be. I'm just giving them a heads up. Other people do want the spouse to just be handed the papers, so it comes as a complete shock. I personally would not say that that's the best thing to do, but some people want that. Um, there is a possibility that your spouse will find out that you filed for divorce in between when you first file for divorce and when they actually get handed the paperwork, because it is a public record. Um, and so it is on the court docket. So you can go to like Orange County or Miami-Dade County, Broward County, whatever county you're in, and type in your name and see if there's been something filed. I don't think very many people necessarily know how to do that, but it is going to be a public record. Now, the actual documents themselves are a little bit harder to see, but the name will appear. That's definitely one thing to think about, is how you're going to inform your spouse, or if you want your lawyers to inform your spouse. We can definitely tell you different ways, but ultimately we can't tell you what to do or what is best for your scenario. Only you know that.
A lot of people are familiar with couples therapy and joint counseling and stuff like that. And while that certainly can be helpful in a lot of different situations, probably the best thing that a divorce client can do is get their own therapist to go through the process. Because, and from a couple therapy standpoint, this is not to get into therapy to try to work on the marriage. You've already made the decision. You want to get a divorce. The divorce is going to happen. Getting a therapist involved at that point, just for you, can really give you a lot of benefits. Now, this is not necessarily like going to a shrink and examining your past lives or doing hypnotherapy, but just having somebody who's objective, who you can talk to maybe once a week and, vent out frustrations, talk about things, can bring you back down to earth or make you see things more objectively. The other good thing is these therapists have seen like every different scenario. They've counseled people before the divorce, they've counseled them during the divorce, and they probably have a ton of clients that they've counseled all the way through the process, and now they're post divorce and they're happy. And so the therapist can kind of tell you what you're going through right now is difficult, but you're going to emerge from this a lot healthier than you are now. And they can also be a lot cheaper per hour than a lawyer. So having somebody that you talk to vent your frustrations about to a therapist is probably better directed than to your divorce lawyer. We can do a lot of things legally, but we can't do a lot of things emotionally. And so you're better off talking to a therapist throughout the process. I think it's critical. Honestly, I wish that more divorce clients did it, because we as lawyers can tell the difference. When we have clients that are going to therapy, once a week or twice a month throughout the divorce process, we can tell, because they're going to be a lot more objective, a lot more level-headed. They're going to be much easier to work with in general than people that are just kind of raw dogging divorce.
Yeah. On the therapy note, here's where I'm at. Perhaps you and your wife just kind of looked at each other, and maybe there aren't any kids involved, and you've been together for 4 or 5 years, and you just look at each other and you just shrug your shoulders and say, we're just not right for each other. And you sit down at the kitchen table and you want to get a divorce, and everything's fine. Like, you're cool. Everything's good. And that happens. And if you're in that camp, then more power to you. That's great. But a lot of times there's some emotions involved, whether it's one party doesn't want to get a divorce or wants to go to counseling, or there's kids involved and you're afraid your husband doesn't know how to change a diaper, or if you're a husband, you're afraid that the wife isn't patient enough with your children or your son or whatever. I almost want to ask everybody who's listening to this podcast to say this out loud: is there is nothing wrong with getting a therapist. And look, if you can go afford to pay cash and pay $250 for an hour for a therapist who doesn't accept insurance and has been doing it for 25 years, more power to you. If you can't afford that, go online, whether it's, I think it's like betterhealth.com or whatever, and, you know, find somebody for $20 or go through your health insurance, just anybody. Because exactly what Matt said, not to try and bring money into the factor, but probably any cost that you spend for an hour talking to a therapist is going to be lower, if not significantly lower, than talking to a lawyer about the emotions, especially if you run it through health insurance or do it online or something along those lines. But perhaps the most important factor is Matt, myself, and the lawyers at our law firm are licensed in the state of Florida to get you through the legal process. We are not licensed in the state of Florida to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs or anxiety or anything like that. Now, of course, as a human being, we can just talk to you, but you're going to be much better suited speaking to somebody whose profession is getting people through anxiety, through emotions, through grief, devastation, changes, adjustment disorders, whatever it might be. And then that is going to help you on the legal side of things, because when bad news is delivered or unwanted news is delivered, you're going to be able to handle those emotions a little bit better, even just after one or two therapy sessions. You're going to be able to take a deep breath and say, look, I knew that bad news is going to come, or something along those lines, rather than getting an email saying, hey, the judge ordered X, Y, and Z, or whatever it might be. You're going to be much better equipped to handle the emotional aspect of bad news and good news. Because remember, there's always going to be bad news and good news that happens in a divorce. Really, what we want to try to avoid as divorce attorneys and clients going through divorce are these knee jerk reactions, and then exacerbating the knee jerk reaction over a period of time that clouds our judgment. Because if we go all the way back to the beginning with my example with the retirement, look, there's things that I would personally change, and I'll tell clients that all the time. This is not my personal opinion. This isn't how I think that it should be, but it is what it is. This is the law, right? We can't change it as divorce attorneys. And one of the things that any therapist will work with you on is control the things you can control and give up the things that you can't. That's a basic premise of therapy. And even if you don't agree with it, it can make you upset. But if you can't control it, stop getting upset about it and learn coping mechanisms. And those are the types of things that therapists can help out with. And then that helps the legal process continue to move along, because when we say, hey, we need 24 months of bank account statements or something along those lines, you might get very upset and not want to produce 24 months of bank account statements because there'll be numerous 7-Eleven charges that ultimately your wife will know that you're buying cigarettes or whatever you shouldn't be buying. Um, but you can't control that. And if you start getting super upset about that and just pushing it off and saying, I'm not going to give those to you, well, then that's going to slow down the entire process. The more healthy coping mechanisms that you can learn about, the better off you're going to be in the process. So, huge proponent of therapy. Even if you're level headed about everything, there's nothing wrong with still going to a therapist just to talk through things.
It can also help you if you've got minor kids. You can go and talk to the therapist, like, hey, how do I explain the divorce to my children? And they'll rattle off, they'll tell you precise formulas on what to do. So you're not just researching online or trying to figure your way through it. You can really do it in the best way possible. And then one other thing I wanted to touch on is about reducing stress and anxiety throughout the divorce process. There's things that you can do to prepare for a divorce that are going to reduce a lot of the stress during the divorce case. For example, if you're a business owner, you know that you started the business during the marriage. You know that you're in during the divorce process, you're probably going to have to produce business bank account statements. You're probably going to have to produce profit and loss statements, balance sheets. So that can get very stressful during a divorce case because you might not have those things prepared. So now in your divorce case, you're going to have to go and get with your accountant to try to get all your statements and everything up to date. So there's things that you could do to prepare. I'm not a tax attorney, but having all of your taxes done and filed on time, personal and business tax returns, having all of your business bank accounts reconciled and put into QuickBooks, and have a current profit and loss balance sheet, having inventory lists prepared. going through the house and identifying anything of value, maybe over $100, that is inside the marital home. Things that you might want, things that you might be willing to give up. Maybe walking through the house, taking a video of everything in there, making sure everything is where it's supposed to be, having contingency plans lined up. If you're going to be leaving the house, where are you going to go? What are you going to take with you? How are you going to document things that you take with you? So there's a lot of things that you can do to try to prepare for the divorce in order to minimize the anxiety during the divorce process and to minimize the amount of actual other work you have to do, because just going through a divorce itself is a lot of work. It's mentally taxing. It's emotionally taxing. You don't want to also have to worry about getting all your back paid taxes up to date and filing returns and getting all your business accounting done. That's just a lot of extra added work. So if those things are kind of all current and you bring all those things current prior to filing, then it's going to make the process unfold a lot easier.
One other thing, and I don't want this to come off as too rigid or assigning a task or anything like that, but I think if you transform the divorce process into treating it almost like a business, I understand this is about lives. I'm not suggesting that you should treat your life as a business, but the actual divorce process, treating it as a business or something that you do on a set schedule, that will probably help out a lot. Let's say you have kids or something, but you know that you get home early from work on Wednesdays and they don't get out of school until a little bit later. So you've got 2 hours every Wednesday or something. Just say, hey, on 2 hours on Wednesday, I'm going to use that time to kind of do what I need as it relates to the divorce. And there'll be weeks that you probably do need to spend the entire 2 hours getting documents. It's mainly financial documents, but there might be some other stuff. There'll be other weeks that you don't have to. But if you mentally kind of block out that time, like, hey, this is when I work on my divorce case, it will probably help the process go a lot smoother and help you digest things. To stick with financial documents for a minute, financial documents are the bane of our existence, they're the bane of our client's existence. We have to exchange just troves of documents with opposing counsel in almost all divorce cases. And it can be quite cumbersome and whatnot. And we're here to guide you through it. We try and make it as easy as possible. I really think that we probably have one of the best processes for doing it in the state, I would like to think, but it's still a lot of work for everybody. And I think that if you just get an email and you say, "Oh, they need all these documents. I'll do it this weekend," and then the weekend rolls around and you need to mow your lawn, so you mow your lawn, then you're tired, you never get to it, right? But if you just say, "Okay, Wednesdays from 2 to 4 is when I'm gonna sit down and do what I need to, get the information over to my lawyer," it's gonna reduce fees, help things move along, and get you divorced ultimately quicker. It's gonna be a lot easier. One last note on that is there certainly are times that we need things right away. In some cases, there are emergency situations where there's an emergency motion, or maybe the judge enters some sort of order to show cause, and we got to get our ducks in a row in a matter of 5 days or something. We've got to track you down and you've got to work with us on that. But those are really the exception. For 90, 95% of cases, it's 30-day time periods, give or take. There's different rules and timelines and stuff, but typically it's 30 days. So, hey, we got this. We need these documents within 30 days. We don't need them the minute that we tell you that we need them. We'll let you know if we do. But typically it's, hey, just get these documents over to us within the next 2 weeks or week or whatever it might be. And so that's where having a set time, Wednesdays, 2 to 3, you know, Tuesday nights, maybe you're a night owl, 9 p.m. to midnight or whatever. If you just set that time, it's going to help move the process along a lot smoother.
One last thing I'd like to leave people with is to kind of recast and reframe how you look at divorce. And again, we're not encouraging divorce here, but a good way to look at it is not look at disruption. Don't look at it as destroying your family or destroying your family's lives. Don't look at it like destruction at all. Look at it like restructuring. That's what you're doing. You're restructuring your life. You're restructuring the family. That can be achieved, I can't say painlessly, because ultimately nobody really wins in a divorce. However, if you look at it like restructuring, then it kind of gives you an opportunity to live a life on your terms after the divorce, parent the way you want to parent when it's your time, manage your money the way you want it managed, manage your schedule, manage your household, whether it's an apartment or a house, whatever it is. It's going to give you a lot more autonomy. You'll no longer be subject to somebody else's supervision and control. You're going to restructure your life. Now, that also means that your spouse is going to have to restructure their life. The children's lives are going to be restructured to a certain extent. And obviously, as divorce lawyers, we can try to help minimize the amount of disruption. But if you look at it like a restructuring versus disruption to a certain extent, it can often give you a much better headspace to approach getting a divorce.
One thing that is very helpful as a divorce attorney is if we know what you really want at the beginning of the case, and that can certainly evolve. But if you come in at the beginning of the case and we don't expect you to know everything, we don't expect you to know exactly how the process is going to play out, we don't expect you to know the intricate elements of equitable distribution and how retirement accounts are going to be transferred and stuff like that. But if you come in at the beginning of the case and you say, look, I've been the higher income earner for our entire marriage, we've been married 10 years, I really just want our house. I want to keep our house. This is where I want to live. And I'm prepared to undertake the whole mortgage. And I want my Milwaukee tool set, right? I'm going to say, yeah, we can probably make that happen unless for some reason your wife wants a house or your spouse wants a house. But, typically if your goals are somewhat consistent with the law and what can happen, we could say, yeah, we can definitely try. We're lawyers, we can't make any guarantees. You never know how it's going to work out, but we can consistently try. And we can tell you what essentially needs to happen for that to occur. Like, you want to keep your house. Well, if you have a mortgage and your spouse is on the deed and the mortgage, you're going to need to refinance it. One of the issues that we've run into cases currently is people who took out loans in 2019 at a 2.9, 3.1% interest rate, and they're having to refinance at 6, 7, 8%, whatever it is now. The mortgage payments goes up. If you're willing to do that and everything, and you say, I can figure it out, and you start the refinancing process, you can probably keep the house. Every case is different, but you probably can keep it. On the flip side, if you come in and the first things that you say are, I don't want to give my spouse a flipping penny because for 10 years I've provided every single thing and I don't think they're entitled to anything. Well, we can quickly tell you that ain't going to happen. Whether you want to choose to accept it or not, at least you know right out of the gate. You can write down everything, but I would say write down 2 or 3 things that you really, really want. Big ticket items, 50-50 time sharing, you know, for some people, school designation for their minor children, where the kids are going to go to school. We can talk to you about that right out of the gate and give you an idea if that's something that we can accomplish under the confines of the law. Whether we can accomplish it easily, difficult, if it's going to turn into a contentious matter, whatever it might be.
That'll wrap us up for today. Again, my name is Matthew Waring. I've been here with my partner, Brian Dunmire, and together we are Fairway Law Group. We've got 2 offices. We've got one in Orlando, one in South Florida. We handle cases pretty much all over the state, not the Panhandle, a little too far for us.
But you can still listen to our podcast. And
Still happy to give you information. But this has been another episode of Divorce Well in Florida, and we'll see you back here next time.